Hey guys, thanks for joining me again. I'm Matt Diederich. Today we're going to be working on another Deepsky Astrophotography tutorial. In this episode we'll work on the Pleiades, Messier 45. Beautiful open cluster, still in our own galaxy, but it's about 400 light years away. So a pretty darn close cluster, but what that means is the light that we shot the other night through the telescope is 400 years old. So we're time traveling as we capture astrophotos of the beautiful night sky, and that's one of the coolest things why I love astrophotography. So today we're going to jump into PixInsight, do the stacking, combining, and stretching of the data, and then we'll pull it into Photoshop, finalize the photo, have a nice sweet shot ready to share or turn into a cool print. So without further ado, let's jump into PixInsight. Okay, we are here in PixInsight. We're going to open up the data that we shot just the other evening. For this data set, I shot 66 light frames of the Pleiades, and they were 3-minute photographs, all unguided, and I was using a Takahashi FSQ 106mm and their EM200 mount. So first step, now that we have the lights saved to the folder, we're going to batch pre-process these and apply darks and bias frames. What I love about that FSQ 106mm is pretty much don't even need flat frames with a full frame sensor, which is pretty unbelievable. So you'll see that we have some awesome tricks up our sleeve to remove a little bit of vignetting, but did not need flat frames for this. We'll add the light frames. We will add the dark frames. And we will add the bias frames. Okay, now that the calibration frames are loaded, let me take a step back and explain what bias and what dark frames are for those of you that might be new to astrophotography and stacking and using calibration frames. So number one, a bias frame is just a very short exposure. It's the fastest the camera can shoot to record basically just the signal and the noise that the electronics produce when writing and saving a photograph and when transferring it. So for my example, 1/8000th of a second was a bias frame. So I shot 15 of those frames, and then I shot a set of dark frames. Dark frames are used primarily to remove noise. You know, the long exposure noise and heat buildup from creating long deep space astrophotography, need to remove that noise in photographs, and dark frames helps to do that. You want to shoot darks at the same exact temperature, same exact camera settings, only difference, take the camera off and then cover it up with your dust cap, or if you have a lens cap for your telescope, you can put that on. Goal, you want to make sure that no light gets to the sensor for a dark frame. Okay, we have our bias, we have our darks, and we have our lights all loaded up. We have the CFA box checked because we're shooting with a modified Canon EOS R, so that's shooting color images, make sure that's enabled. Let's select our output directory and click save, and then we're going to click run. It's going to give us that error because we didn't shoot flats. Go ahead and click OK. Software is going to go ahead, run all that through it, and then we'll meet back here as soon as it's done. Next up, we need to star align the images. So if you go to Process, Star Alignment, go ahead, select a file to use as a reference. It needs to be one of your debarred images here. We'll do the first one. Add the remaining files, including the top one as well. You want all the photos selected. Navigate to a directory again, and we'll put them in the debarred folder. Alright, so we're now ready for star alignment. Go ahead and let this run. It's going to take a little bit. All the images now are going to be star aligned, so they're going to kind of stack like a sandwich just so they can reference all the little stars in each photograph. And then the next step will be to actually take that tons and tons of photos that we took, 66 images, 67 images, and the combination will compress them all into one image to remove noise and clean up and improve the signal to noise ratio. So go ahead, click run, and then we'll meet back here as soon as that's done. Alrighty folks, star alignment has just finished up. It has taken all of those 60 some images that we shot, and it has referenced each of those photos to one another. So with that said, we could take all those photos and now we can stack them and integrate them into one photo. That's where the magic happens in astrophotography. That is where the noise gets reduced. That is where the signal from the faint detail in gas and dust gets raised up above the background and turned into something cool. So let's go ahead and jump into that. We're going to do that via image integration. So open that up here. We're going to add those files that we shot with under the debarred menu, and you want to find the files that say R at the end. That means they've been registered. So we want to select all of them that have the R, and I think that's all of them for us right now. Next up, once the files have been opened, you have to select your combination method. Combination method of average is going to be awesome for high signal to noise, which is good, so we'll leave it at that. Next up, pixel rejection. If you have a satellite or something pass through the frame, you can reject it essentially with a sigma clipping routine. So even if one of the frames had an object or something pass by through it when you're imaging, sigma clipping will analyze it and it'll remove those bright pixels so it doesn't ruin your whole image set. So I'm going to put a Winsorized sigma clipping pixel rejection on. Lastly, just going to click run. It's going to take a few minutes to do this, so we'll meet back here as soon as it's done. Alright, image integration has just finished up, so we have our main image here, and if we do a small stretch on it, we can see what we have. We can zoom in, and the background is insanely clean. Very free of noise, thanks to stacking those 66 images. Let us grab a single frame and compare the noise to it. Let's open up the single image here, and you're going to see the wonders of stacking. Let's stretch that old photo, and we'll zoom in on the nebulosity, kind of down around here, and now let's just go down that way in this photograph, and we'll zoom in a little bit more. Alrighty. As you can see, the difference is absolutely unbelievable, but the stacking and then the integration, the combining of all those photographs into one sandwich, if you will, that is what creates the noise-free image, because all the mathematics and statistics behind numerous photos helps bring up the faint detail in the nebulosity here. In the single photo, you have the noise dominating the photograph. You don't have the signal, the clean nebulosity showing much from the background. Compared with all the noise in this one, you really can start seeing the magic of stacking and what you can do with pretty short amount of data. You know, it's kind of cool. Alrighty, so now that we have a quick comparison showing the middle area of these beautiful stars as well, you can kind of scroll up and see them. Difference between stacking and not stacking is pretty significant here. All that color modeling is the noise from that single exposure, and the noise is just so insignificant here after stacking 66 images. But let's move on to the next step and let's create a pretty photograph. First up, because of an adapter being loose in my imaging train, always check to make sure your adapters are tight, boys and girls, because look at what happens. This is what can happen because the adapter was moving around a little bit and it caused the camera to tilt a very small amount, but just enough that it caused each photo to kind of move around. I guess it's kind of cool because it's like automatic dithering, you know, so that's kind of cool. But let's go ahead and remove this by doing a dynamic crop. That'll be easy enough to remove. Dynamic crop is done. Next up, we need to remove the gradient because we didn't shoot flats. So we're going to use the dynamic background tool here. It's pretty magical what this tool can do. So go ahead and click the dynamic background extraction onto the image, and we need to adjust a few settings here. If you click generate just with the default settings, you're going to have a few samples put across the image, as you can see, but we need to extend those samples out to the very edge because that's where we want the model to grab some points. So normally to do that we need to increase the tolerance, and that's going to extend it out a little bit more. And you can reduce that minimum sample weight as well, and then I'll grab some of those points on the outside. A lot of times I've found that less points actually works better. So let's just try this at a first pass. Dynamic background extraction is going to create a model. Okay, it's going to model the background and all this gradients going on, and we need to subtract that. We need to subtract that model from this photograph. So let's see if this one looks okay by just clicking and applying. Okay, now that the dynamic background extraction is completed, let's take a look at the model, do a screen stretch on it. You have vignetting here. So it is modeling the darkened portion of the sky here, and it's going to subtract that from the main image. Let's see how it worked and do a screen stretch on it. So that is looking, all this background dust and gas. I mean, that is just incredible. This is the power of the dynamic background extraction tool and a little bit of iterations. I mean, we played around with it. As you saw, the first example wasn't as good, but we removed that portion of the crop, and that possibly was giving us an error. But this is all background gas and dust. This is spectacular. So you can really zoom in and see a lot of what's going on in the nebulosity now. So I am pretty stoked with that. I don't know if you are, but I am, because that's light polluted suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Horrible sky conditions, and we are able to pull out background gas and dust. That is special. With that said, let's go ahead and exit out of the dynamic background extraction tool, because I think we're ready to move on. This, I believe, could be, these little portions could be dust motes, and because we didn't shoot flat frames, the dust motes were not cleaned up, but we can correct for that in Photoshop and remove that little dark portion. Okay, so now we have stacked the image, we have combined the images, we have cropped, and then we have also applied a dynamic background extraction method to it to correct for some of that gradient issues that we dealt with. Next up, we need to correct for some of this color inconsistencies. To do that, let's go back up to Process and Color Calibration, and first up, do a background neutralization. We need to provide a preview of a background area of the sky. So on Windows, you can do Alt-N and then draw a little background preview area here. And we need to set the reference as that preview right here. Click OK. And the default settings are normally pretty good. Alright, you can try blinking on and off to see if any major difference was noticed. Sometimes it's extremely difficult to tell at this step, but the next step is usually where we can start seeing some of the color correcting working. I can see a minor amount of tint change, but we will exit this, and next up we're going to open the color calibration, and you need to draw another preview. So again, click Alt-N, drag across a white portion. For me, I'll do some of this nebulosity here of an image. Make sure you select your previews. Preview 2 for the white reference here is going to be that box. Background reference again was our preview 1 over here. Again, default settings normally work just fine with this, so we can click and drag away. Now this one, you notice a big difference. Let us blink on and off for this one. This one corrected a lot of the color cast. This kind of had a green hue to it, but that green hue is gone now. Zoom in and we'll blink again. Next up, I want to try to remove any remaining green cast that could be in this image without me knowing. So to do that, we can open up this SCNR tool. Default settings are great. Just click and drag. And let's zoom in and see, because I did notice a little minor change. So there's a minor change, there is a little bit of green going on here, and then after it's been applied, it's a little bit more reddish, a little bit more blue overall in general with that reflection nebulae. So this looks good. Now that we've stacked the image, we've combined them, we've cropped, we did dynamic background extraction, and we did the 2 color correcting methods of neutralizing the background and then color calibration. You can see that those methods have helped us produce a more clean and natural looking photograph here, and then we hit it with one iteration of the SCNR tool to remove that minor last bit of green cast in an image. We can reset the active window here and go ahead and apply a permanent stretch. So click the small box up there, and for me, I want to go ahead and run an arc sine stretch. That does a great job at keeping color in the image while keeping the highlights under somewhat of control, which is pretty cool. So enable the preview window and estimate the black point. And you can play with this slider here, whether you want something very subtle. You can really start honing in and seeing the nebulosity come in. If you jack it all the way up, you'll notice that you really start pushing in some of this background gas and dust. But for me, since I didn't shoot 10 hours of data on the target, the background will definitely be noisy. So I want to do maybe something around the 600 benchmark area. This looks pretty cool because we pushed in a lot of detail and brought out this nebulosity pretty well. And you can click apply. Now that our arc sine stretch has been applied, I noticed that there's this green cast to the image. So you can utilize the SCNR tool and drag and drop that onto the image to remove that green cast. And a before and after will show you how it eliminated that overall green cast to the image. So I really like how this stretch is showing a soft amount of background dust and gas, and then keeping the core of the Pleiades pretty retained. But we could attempt a little shorter of a stretch to just boost it, and we could do a live preview and estimate the black point and kind of just see if we want to push it any more to bring up a little bit more of the background. Remember, it's always a compromise because we're really going to be starting to push in the noise at this point. Let's see what this looks like and apply that. Okay, so before and after. This was before the extra stretch, and this is after. So we're definitely pushing in a good bit more noise into the background here. So it really depends on how far we want to push the background, but it does look pretty darn cool with all the background gas and dust going on. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to revert back to the original here, and I'm going to do a little bit smaller of a stretch. I don't want to go that aggressive, so let's go to the live preview again, estimate the black point, and let's reduce it a little bit more. So 1 would be original here from that first stretch, and then we can add just a hair in. Let's do that and apply it. And we'll exit that, and we'll do it before. So this is before we did the SCNR to remove the color cast. That's after. And this is one last little stretch here. So I think that looks pretty cool. So I think we're pretty much ready to take this into Photoshop and finish it up. So I'm just going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save it as a TIFF. For the tutorial here, and we will save it, and make sure you save this as a 16-bit TIFF. And now next up, let's go ahead and pull it up into Photoshop. We have the photo uploaded into Photoshop here, and off the bat what I want to do is I want to reduce this noise in the background a little bit. So one great way that I'm going to try to do this is duplicate the layer, and you can hit Control J as well if you want to do that, or you can drag and drop to duplicate that layer. And I want to go to the filter camera raw here. I'm going to zoom in on the background, and I want to go to the detail tab, and I want to play around with this noise reduction tabs. So I notice that there's this color speckling kind of happening, so the color noise reduction is what's going to remove that. So if you see, this is none applied, and that's with it applied. So you can really start seeing that that color noise will go away, which is a good thing. And this is with no noise reduction to the background, and that is with a little bit applied. Let's go ahead and click OK and see how that looks. We can do it before and after. So it's just enough, it cleans up some of that speckling. in the image. Cleans up some of that color noise as well, the color modeling, and just cleans it up. Cool. I think that looks pretty awesome. I want to boost the saturation a little bit, and for those of you that don't understand what this panel is, this is a TK Action panel. I use it for a lot of my landscape editing, but I found it very helpful for night sky editing actually. This portion specifically, you can select one of these areas, whether it be lights or darks, and it'll pick those tonal values, and then you can create subsequent masks here. So it makes it a lot more easy to make adjustments to the background or anything selective. So to give you an example, so before and after with that noise reduction, that's global. I mean, this is affecting everything, and you can notice that it's kind of affecting the nebulosity here. So I want to try to just affect the background itself, the darker areas, and try to leave some of that light area of the nebulosity unaffected. So I'm going to just duplicate a layer here, and let's select a dark area with that TK Action panels, maybe a dark 3, and create a layer mask. So if you enter the mask and click Alt and click on that mask, you can see the white areas are what is going to be affected. So that is the area of the dark background sky, and the darker areas here, this is going to be protected from the mask. This is not going to be affected. So let's apply this correction that we just did up here to that, and it's only going to apply it to the background, which is going to be cool. So if we hit Control H to hide those little areas, you can click now on and off. You can see that it affected just the background with minor effect on, say, these highlights. You can see a little bit, but not much. It's going to blend a hair, but that's just the nice feathering. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility on just targeting the background, and I like that flexibility. So I think that looks cool. Now, vice versa here, I mentioned about trying to increase some saturation into this image. Let's go ahead and do that with making a lights 1 layer, and we will make a vibrance layer. So if we go to our adjustments under properties here, you can just boost and see that color get pushed in if you really just want to jack up the color. And we can click that on and off, and you can see that we really drove in a lot of color to the image. Now that might be just a little bit too much blue, but you can see you got some of these gold stars really starting to get some color pushed into them. So it affects a little bit of the background. You can see those blue stars starting to get some color in them as well. But I definitely don't want to go that high because I know it's going to be pushing in some greens and some artifacts. So just a little bit of color added. Nice and subtle. I think one other thing that I would like to do is maybe just increase the brightness of the overall image. So not making a mask, we will just do a levels adjustment here, and we can just brighten it up a little bit. This midtones here, you can adjust, and it's going to adjust the midtones a good bit, so you could really start seeing some of that background portion of the sky come in that we had. I want to leave that, and you could just do a little bit of a brights adjustment. Something that looks pretty darn good. And again, this is just all shot from the suburbs of Pittsburgh. I'm very shocked that we had this much background gas and dust in the image. It's pretty awesome to see. So for me, I'm pretty much done with this shot. It looks pretty exceptional to me, especially for the imaging conditions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten the image, and then I can save it to various sizes that I want. Maybe you want to play with the rotation of the image. Maybe you want to rotate it clockwise to have the Pleiades up to a different position depending on how you framed your photograph. Or maybe you just want to keep it as you had it, but you can play around with your sizes and with the canvas rotation size. But I think realistically having it back to the standard view that I had it at looks compositionally very appealing to me. And I think overall might just crop in a little bit more to make it all about the Pleiades while still keeping some of that background gas and dust in the field, and something like that. All right. Well guys, I hope you learned a few tips and tricks for editing the Pleiades here. Case in point, again, some cameras and telescopes, you don't require flats, but a lot of systems you really want to run with flats, because even if you have dust or debris on the imaging sensor or a filter, the flats are going to help remove that. So because I didn't make flats, what you see here is right here is going to be a dust mote, so that could have been removed if I had a flat frame. So I can kind of just do a stamp tool and click to the side and just try to blend into this and kind of make it go away a little bit compared to what it was before. So since you have that little speck, that's what I was going to say, is just a quick little fix for me. Not as great of an option as taking flats, but in a pinch, if you don't have flat frames and you have dust, you can go ahead and do a stamp tool adjustment to clean that up. Well, we're going to save this and have it for the web to share. So normally I like saving them as little 4x6s, 300 dpi, nice small files to move around. And we'll save that. As always guys, thanks for watching. If you have any comments, please drop them down below. I always respond to every comment. Happy to help, and hope you guys have clear skies for your astrophotography.